Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This one is going to be my speculation, predictions ahead of The Mandalorian Season 3. Obviously we're quite a while away from The Mandalorian Season 3, Season 2 has just ended. But I think there's going to be some interesting stuff happening with the show based on how Season 2 did end, how it sort of changed up the dynamic. And I want to just give some early thoughts, speculation, given that this is sort of what's on everyone's mind in regards to Star Wars. So I think the first thing to talk about is just some clarification on what exactly is happening with The Mandalorian Season 3. Obviously there was a lot of confusion immediately after the last episode of Season 2 with what is the Book of Boba Fett? Is this Season 3? Is it separate or not? It has been confirmed since the Book of Boba Fett is a separate thing. It is not The Mandalorian Season 3, it's not replacing Season 3. It just happens to be the thing that is coming out sort of next that is sort of related to The Mandalorian. Season 3 is still coming, but the impression I get is that it's going to be just slightly delayed. So it's going to be more into like early 2022 rather than kind of winter 2021. So far the two seasons have been in that sort of, November, December time slot. Instead this year we're getting Book of Boba Fett in December and then 2022 at some point The Mandalorian Season 3. So a little bit longer to wait, but it should also be considered that there is a Mandalorian original novel coming out, I think in November 2021. So there will be some new content during the usual time of the year we expect Mandalorian stuff, followed by Book of Boba Fett. So there's that. Beyond that, I don't think we really know too much about Season 3 in terms of like stuff they've directly said about it. I think some of the actors have like briefly mentioned that like, oh, they've been writing Season 3 and they sort of, I suppose, know their characters involved. But I think that's really about it. So the major thing that happened in the last episode of Season 2, of course, was that Luke Skywalker was the Jedi to come in and take Grogu off to train him. So Grogu and Din have been separated, and this really changes the dynamic of the series. Previously it was this sort of traveling show, just these two characters together, and the plot is kind of just about whatever these two encounter, whatever these two get up to. The mission on Din's side has been accomplished at this point. What he set out to do, which was, since I suppose turning away from doing the bounty he did for the Empire, was his Mandalorian mission was to bring Grogu back to his people, which he has now accomplished. What next for that character, and then what next for Grogu? I suppose I'll cover Grogu first. I personally don't think we're going to see Grogu in Season 3. I think they've made the choice at this point to be like, Grogu is now going to appear in something separate. That I think they're aware. People will follow Grogu wherever he goes. So if they put that character in another show, people will watch that show. And so they're going to use Grogu, I think, as a very important character for Star Wars in terms of telling the story they want to tell of this sort of between Episode 6 and the start of Episode 7 time period. So I think that's what they're doing here, is that Grogu is actually going to be set up and used as a very, very important character. I don't think they'll forget to reunite Grogu and Din at some point, but I do think we're going to have quite a lot happen between the characters before we get back around to that point happening. This is something that I think the show actually needed to have happen to get to, I suppose, the character development that we actually want. The show is in a very sort of, I suppose, safe, sort of comfy position by just having the episodes be Din and Grogu just get up to whatever they get up to. Before if they'd kept it going that way without the mission ever being accomplished or getting close to being accomplished, it would have just left us kind of continue to wait. When is anything of note going to happen with Grogu? When is any character development going to happen for Din? They've of course touched on a few little bits and pieces, but now is the time for that sort of stuff to happen. The two characters kind of can't really just rely on each other to be the sort of centerpiece of their arcs. They now have to do their own thing on their own. In that Grogu is now going off to train with Luke, So he's going to be developing his skills with the Force, and I suppose when we do see him again, he will be much more skilled. He probably won't collapse every time he uses the Force. He might learn to communicate a little bit more. So when he comes back, he might be able to speak to Din, which, again, would very much help the dynamic, easing the communication between the two characters. Similarly, on Din's side of things, now that he's going to be, I suppose, on his own, potentially interacting with the other Mandalorians a lot more, he's going to have to figure out what his own Mandalorian creed is. Does he still believe in the, Children of the Watch, I suppose Death Watch way of being a Mandalorian with the strict rules? Or is he going to realize that he can be more like Bo-Katan and the others and take the helmet off if he wants to? That, sure, there are some rules that are sort of inherent to Mandalorians, but they don't need to be as strict. You don't need to hold to them as strongly, because there are times when those rules get in the way of what you need to do, which is exactly what happened in the last few episodes of Season 2. He ended up showing his face to Mayfield. He ended up, Mayfeld, sorry, I keep saying that, and then he ended up showing his face to pretty much everyone in the last episode. And I think that has to be notable. That has to be where they go from here. Addressing, now that he has done this, it's not just one person who's decided to keep it a secret. It's now a whole group of people, including enemies. People he can't get to agree to keep his identity a secret. He's now, revealed his face publicly. He can't keep this under wraps. Does he go ahead with his own creed, which suggests that he would take the helmet off and now he can't actually put it back on? Or will he adopt the other Mandalorians' way of doing things, which is that they're completely fine with taking their helmets off when they need to, and will just transition the character from only occasionally taking his helmet off to, no, when he talks to people, he'll take the helmet off. And it will be more like Bo-Katan, where in action she wears the helmet, in dialogue scenes she takes it off. Probably the right way to do it. And to get the character as well as get the battle protection. Because they could do an interesting thing where he decides to keep the helmet off because he doesn't feel worthy enough to wear it anymore. That could be an interesting dynamic, but I think that's probably what they're going to play off, is basically Bo-Katan and Din and their different views, I suppose, on their own Mandalorian creeds. In that Din, of course, is struggling with the whole crazy rules about the helmet and like it's borderline a religion. But the last few episodes also presented the idea that Bo-Katan, who kind of, I suppose, sort of made fun to a degree of Din for the whole never taking the helmet off situation, is now suddenly really locked into this thing of like, I can't just accept you giving me the Darksaber. And she's convinced that like she has to win it back through combat. Why is that the case? That's her own rule that she feels that she has to abide to, which Din doesn't particularly care about. Now, that's going to delve into the fact that I do think Bo-Katan is going to, I suppose, move more into a sort of main character position in The Mandalorian going forward. Because I'm guessing at least an arc, or if not the core of Season 3, is going to be about him interacting with the other Mandalorians as they set up and then go back to Mandalore. Because that was the setup of like, okay, we get the cruiser, the Imperial cruiser, which we will use to try and take back Mandalore, and maybe afterwards, once you've delivered the child to where you need to, maybe you'll consider joining us. So Bo-Katan wants Din to join her on the mission to, I suppose, maybe see actual Mandalore, as she views him as someone, worthy of being part of her team. Now, the extra dynamic on top of that is that he has inadvertently claimed the Darksaber as his own, and she feels she has to win it back from him in some way. She is, I suppose, effectively the ruler of Mandalore in terms of, I suppose, the person most people would view as being the leader, both in terms of, I suppose, her lineage, but then also her just skills as a leader. In that, obviously, Bo-Katan is the sister of Satine, who was the previous leader of Mandalore, at least in the Clone Wars. She has been the leader up until whatever happened with the Imperials, and she's obviously the leader of whatever group of Mandalorians she commands. So I think when we go into Season 3, we borderline have to pick up immediately where the last episode ended, or just like a little bit afterwards. Because I think you still have a lot to address. That, okay, they now have control of the cruiser, but Gideon is still right there, like he's alive. We still have to address what we're going to do with him. We have to address, like, okay, we saw like Fennec Shan and Boba Fett set up the Book of Boba Fett, but we never in the episode actually saw Boba Fett come to pick up Fennec Shan. Now, is it important that you necessarily show that? I'm not sure, but I do think you need to address that, like, okay, ask Din, are you actually going to come with us now that you've delivered the child? And have him answer. Because again, he is in possession of the Darksaber. Is he going to go off on his own and keep the Darksaber, or is he going to join them and they'll address whatever is going on with the Darksaber themselves? Gideon obviously is going to be an important character going forward, because they have to address why Bogatan has this sort of different approach now. Why she, in the past, accepted the Darksaber being given to her by Sabine, but now refuses the same sort of situation with Din handing her the Darksaber. My guess is that this relates to how she actually lost it to Gideon in the first place. That either she was bested in combat by him and feels because she lost, she can only claim it again by actually winning it. That it's fine receiving it for the first time as a gift, but she has to earn that now. She previously has lost. Or she was put into some situation where she had to, like, give it away. Because obviously, like, if she lost to Gideon in combat, how is she actually still alive? Which would present, I think, more of the idea of it was probably just taken from her as the Empire took over Mandalore, and she couldn't claim it back, rather than necessarily being sort of defeated one-on-one necessarily. But we'll see exactly how that goes. Because the thing with Gideon's character is that he knows everything. Like, assume I know everything. So he is, like, studied, I suppose, Mandalorian culture and knew the way to claim this thing and keep her from claiming it in an easy way. So my guess is that they're probably going to have to cover a bit of a flashback to how she lost the Darksaber in the first place, and why there is so much sort of anger and emotion sort of attached to the loss of it, and why she needs to claim it in such a specific way. Now, this relates to, what is it, the Night of a Thousand Tears, or that event that they mentioned at the end of Season 1, I believe it was, which I think is meant to be the Imperial final attack on Mandalore, that really took it over and damaged it so badly. Because, again, like, Boba Fett talked about it as if the place is glass at this point, that there's nothing left of it. What did the Empire actually do? We haven't seen Mandalore in quite a while. So what does the place look like at this point? I get the impression it's been obviously mined very heavily for Beskar, to the point where there's probably very little left on the planet, but what is actually left of the people? And again, if you have seen the Clone Wars arcs relating to Mandalore, you'll know that, like, the majority of people from Mandalore aren't Mandalorians wearing armor. They are just, like, normal people, and their warriors are the ones with the armor, and then Duchess Satine was taking things in a more pacifist direction. So it's a very kind of all over the place planet to a degree with regards to its past being exceptionally focused on warriors, its recent history being more of a pacifist neutral system and everything, but then the return of, like, Death Watch and so on, stuff we saw in Rebels. So, you know, that's the sort of stuff that we need to address. I'm assuming where we're going to go from here is that Din will join Bo-Katan, or will be forced into a situation where, like, you're staying with me until we resolve this Darksaber situation. So he's going to go with her. I guess we'll meet up with all of her army of Mandalorians, however many she has, and we'll address whatever plan it is that we actually have going on. They have Gideon captive, so unless they do some sort of thing where he escapes somehow, Gideon is going to be the prisoner of our hero characters, and they might be trying to get information from him as he finds some way to escape. That seems quite interesting to me. I do think going down that path does point things in the direction of I don't really see much of a place for at least a couple of episodes for where Cara Dune is going to be particularly involved, unless she decides she's helping Din to fight for Mandalore, which I don't think she'll want to do. Again, there's some speculation that Cara Dune is going to more transition to being one of the characters in Rangers of the New Republic, and so on. The fact that we do have all these other spin-off shows, and already, okay, Fennec Shan and Boba Fett are done. They're sorted. They have their own show with the Boba Fett show. I guess some of the main cast will go into Rangers of the New Republic. Some of them, like Ahsoka, of course, she's getting her own show also, which I think leaves this show to very much be The Mandalorian, about The Mandalorian, and just everything Mandalorian related. So, actually getting to see the planet Mandalore could be an interesting thing. Obviously, it's going to have a lot of impact for Clone Wars fans, getting to see what the place is like now, and especially if they introduce some of the other characters, like maybe Sabine actually makes an appearance in this show. Maybe they have flashbacks and it features Duchess Satine. Who knows? There's so many ways to do this. But with Din, like, obviously, he has the Darksaber. He is the quote-unquote ruler by definition of having that blade. But does he want it? That's the big question. And how do they actually resolve that? I'm guessing the character arc they'll go for is pretty much like I said, where he will more be dealing with, what sort of a Mandalorian is he? Is it okay for him to go against some of the sort of oaths that he's kind of taken, of like not showing his face to anyone? Where does that leave him now? Can he just switch to being more of a normal Mandalorian or not? And he'll have to deal with that and accepting that, while dealing with the emotion of not having Grogu around anymore. Bo-Katan is going to have to deal with, more confusion about the Darksaber. Is she the right leader, I'm guessing? In that, when she eventually has to, I suppose, potentially explain how she lost the Darksaber, it'll be viewed as this big failure for her. She was viewed by everyone as like the leader the planet needs, but even she couldn't lead them against the Imperials and win. Because she did talk about, like, if we showed that much backbone against the Empire, we wouldn't be in this mess. Suggesting that they were just completely eventually, like, outpowered, overmatched by the full weight of the Empire attacking Mandalore. So, there's some dynamics that they're going to have to address there. Beyond that, I actually think it's very difficult to figure out anything about where the show is actually really heading right now, apart from its immediate setup. I would be very surprised if Din does just go off on his own, partly because of the whole Darksaber situation. So, unless it is some sort of situation where he literally just leaves the Darksaber there, and he heads off on his own. But even then, he can't really. He doesn't have a ship. So, either he goes with Boba Fett and they drop him off somewhere, just on the way to setting up their show, and he leaves the Darksaber with Bo-Katan, and she's then, in whatever show she's involved in, has to deal with it on its own. I think there's more of a dynamic between the two characters with the fight over the Darksaber, with Gideon being in the middle, than anything else. So I do think Bo-Katan is Mandalorian character more than anything. And yeah, that's the other point, is just that, yeah, he doesn't have a ship, he doesn't really have access to anything, and I suppose until they deal with this immediate situation, he is linked with these Mandalorians until he, finds a way to get a new ship. And once he resolves this, then does he just go back to being a bounty hunter? After he's sort of seen the true Mandalorians, whatever way you want to call them, he might not want to do that anymore after being with Grogu for so long, after kind of going against the Bounty Hunter Guild, even though he's on better terms with Greef Karga now. Is that something he wants to do? I actually really don't know. But if you link him in too much with the plot on Mandalore, he just becomes another Mandalorian, doesn't he? So there has to be something else that sort of happens here. And I don't know if they're going to get, how personal they're going to get, in that there's, what was it? It was episode 6 of the first season. Was one of the only episodes where you really get a sense for like, oh, he had this sort of like wild period of his life when he was more of a brutal bounty hunter, as the others talk about him, the history of him when he was part of their crew or whatever. We might return to that and just, he's more honourable now. What made him make that turn? How much of the things he's doing going forward are going to be like, would Grogu like me doing this or not? And just how do they really address that? There is, I suppose, the potential that they do a show where we focus partly on the Mandalorian dealing with the other Mandalorians, and then we cut over to Grogu training with Luke. I would be very surprised if they did that and they just had 2 separate plots. It would definitely ease you back into season 3 knowing that, oh, we're not going to be like not seeing Grogu for quite a while. But it also is this thing from a marketing point of view. Are Disney really going to have like nothing Grogu related for like the next year or 2? Just because of the way they've taken the plot? I'm not sure. Like, obviously they have merchandise from the last episode to do. They can do their Luke action figures, they can do their Luke with Grogu action figures now, all that sort of stuff. But what after that? What about the new Grogu content? Given how important he is from a marketing point of view for them. I can't see them just holding off on Grogu for this many years, given that I think he is going to be used as a very important Star Wars character to sort of transition us into this new era that is more focused on TV shows and interlinking them than anything else. And that, we have 2 movies announced, like one is Rogue Squadron, fighter pilot movie, fine, and then an untitled movie we know nothing about. They're very set on TV, and they're using these characters that people like to, introduce them in a show people like, to set up shows for other characters. They're doing, I think, a good job for the most part with this. It's just, will it pay off? That's the big question. I think for a lot of people, Grogu and Din's dynamic was the show, was the Mandalorian for them. You have to show, I think, straight away that you are willing now, with Grogu sort of out of the picture for the time being, to go into depth on Din's character. In that, that's what you can do now that you have separated to, is have the characters grow. Now that the thing that's been guiding our main character for so long, he's finished his mission. Where to next is the question. So I'm going to end the speculation there. Obviously, I think it's hard to overly speculate about like, oh, this completely other thing that hasn't been almost directly set up. I do really think Din has to be intertwined with Mandalore at this point for the next time being. And our main cast, I suppose, will be Din, Bogatan, and other Mandalorians, more so than, I suppose, our usual main cast, but we'll have to wait and see. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on what I had to say here. Where do you think they're going to go with Season 3 of The Mandalorian? Where do you think, when or where do you think we'll see Grogu again? And then do you agree that the plot for Din is going to be linked in with Bo-Katan and her Mandalorians? But yeah, let me know that in the comments below. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.